Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this book launch hosted by the King's Institute of King's College London. I'm Christophe Jaffrelot, Untitled Chair, Professor of Indian Politics and Sociology at the King's India Institute. And our institute, as you've just heard, is named after India, but we do work on South Asia at large. And today's event offers one more piece of evidence of this South Asian identity, because the book we are releasing and celebrating is entitled Cricket in Pakistan. His author, Ali Khan, is with us virtually. Hello, Ali. I will introduce you first, and then I'll turn to your discussions. So Ali is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Dean of the Mushtaq Ahmad Gurmani School of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS, the Lahore University for Management Studies, and is sitting in Lahore at the moment. Thank you for being with us. And I'd like to immediately introduce the two discussants we are very fortunate to have with us today as well. Professor Wasim, who is also Professor of Political Science at LUMS, and who has recently published a book entitled Political Conflict in Pakistan with Hearst Publishers, a massive masterpiece. And last but not least, Rajiv Satyasai, famous news anchor, reporter, journalist, and author, of course. So many books on elections in particular have been published by him recently. He was a consulting editor and an anchor of India Today Television. He was the editor-in-chief of Global Broadcast News, that included CNN, IBN, before resigning, as many of you know, in July 2014. And he's a great connoisseur of cricket. He has published in 2017 a fascinating book called The Great Indian Cricket Story. So we'll see whether the Pakistani cricket story and the Indian cricket story converge or diverge. We have 1 hour for that. We have 1 hour that will begin with a presentation by the author, Ali, 25 minutes. I hope will be enough for summarizing this very fascinating book. Each of the discussants will also have, I hope, enough time, 15 minutes each. And then if I have the time, I'll offer my own comments, but we want to make room, as much room as we can, to your questions, the audience questions. And I immediately invite you to send these questions to the Q&A box so that we can organize them. And I say we because Vignesh, who is the architect of the logistic of this series of webinars, will help me in doing so. So without any further ado, I leave the floor to you, Ali, and thank you for in 25 minutes or so, I know it's very, very challenging, present the argument of the book.
Thank you so much. I'm first of all thankful to the King's India Institute for inviting me, and to Professor Jaffrelot, Professor Wasim, and Rajiv Satyasai for being on this very august panel. I'm really honored to be here with everyone. So I'm going to get straight to it because we do have a shortage of time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my book. And of course, I feel that no book on cricket is complete without reference to the work of the great Trinidadian Marxist C.L.R. James. James exhorted the reader to see cricket not simply as a sport, but as part of a much wider social and political reality. I think his quote, which opens my book, "What do they know of cricket? Who only cricket know," is what lies at the heart of my work. Now, as Pakistan's most popular sport by far, cricket has played a very significant role in defining the culture and the history of the country, becoming really a really essential part of its post-colonial identity, of its national pride. It's often been ascribed great power as a national symbol of unity, something that is able to integrate a multi-ethnic, culturally diverse, and stratified society. So cricket has really come to represent Pakistan. But I think, as James implies, cricket has also come to act as a reflection of society, as a microcosm, telling us about its politics, its history, its culture, its aspirations. In Pakistan, cricket is a metaphor for modern life. From the youthful exuberance, energy, and innovation of a young nation to the darker side, which is the increasing religiosity, aspects of corruption, and also its global relations. So my book looks at the way the history, politics, economics, and society of the region have transformed cricket, making it part of a popular culture that represents Pakistan. But simultaneously, cricket has also shaped the very influences that have sculpted it, thereby allowing the exploration and analysis of the intricate relations between sport, culture, politics, identity, and regional cooperation through this unique lens of Pakistani cricket. So I'm going to discuss the two major themes of my book, the reflection of wider society in cricket and cricket's influence on wider society, politics, and culture. So these are the two main themes that I'm going to try and cover in the next 20 minutes or so. And I'll start with the parallel histories of Pakistan and of Pakistan's cricket. So for Pakistan, a sense of endemic disarray seems to have persisted from its difficult birth in 1947, when up to a million people perished in the violence that accompanied partition, and a further 20 million people were displaced. How did Pakistan even survive in 1947 amidst floods of refugees, a threadbare government machinery that operated out of makeshift tents, a loss of qualified personnel and finance, and barely any industry and international support? Is really a fascinating question to ask. But against all odds, it not only survived, but Pakistan has had periods of relative prosperity as well. The story of cricket is similar. This is a country now that had no domestic cricketing structure, but won a test match in its very first series against India in 1952. 2 years later, on its first tour abroad to England, Pakistan registered a win against the country that had introduced the game to them. Now, in contrast, it would take India 20 years to register a first test victory over England. It would take New Zealand 26 years to register their first win against England. Both India and then Pakistan owed the legacy of cricket to the soldiers and sailors who brought it over from British shores, and then to the Parsi community who took up the game initially. In time, the other ethno-religious groups joined in, Hindus, Muslims, and later the rest all became part of the quadrangular and then the pentangular tournaments that were played in Bombay and replicated in cities such as Karachi, in Delhi, and in Lahore. When Pakistan begins its cricketing journey, it was led by the Oxford-educated Abdul Hafiz Kardar, and it consisted of a team almost entirely comprising middle-class college graduates from the urban centers of Karachi and Lahore. The influence of these large centers is already palpable. A complete lack of a domestic structure meant dependence on universities and schools in Lahore and Karachi. And if you think about it, right up until the late 1970s, we find that 80% of all cricketers in Pakistan who had represented Pakistan had come from either Karachi or from Lahore. Two centers producing all the cricketers, 80% of the cricketers, making it a narrow elite sport. And change begins to happen in the 1970s. And it happens because the team finds, one, considerable success. There is a spread of TV and radio coverage, and the growth in international venues for playing cricket, leading to what Appadurai refers to as the vernacularization of the game in Pakistan and in India, prompting Ashish Nandi to say that cricket was an Indian game that was accidentally discovered by the British. As radio and television coverage propelled the game to different parts of the country and a much more diverse population, the rapidly fluctuating political and economic transformations in the country were beginning to be reflected in the nature of the cricket team as well. The 1970s, and in fact, the 1960s and 1970s in Pakistan was a culturally liberal time. Cinema, folk culture, poetry, singers, intellectuals flourished, and you had really a more pluralistic vision of Islam being emphasized. In the 70s and early 80s, Pakistan was West aligned, and it was regarded, and this is difficult for us to comprehend at this time, as impossibly glamorous. And I take those words from an Indian author. In large part, this image of Pakistan promoted by its close relations to the West was also due to Imran Khan, who at this time had this international playboy reputation, and of course, Benazir Bhutto, who was also at Oxford at the same time. Tourism boomed. Karachi airport was amongst the busiest of the region. Pakistan was a youthful, confident, and optimistic nation. And this was very much reflected in the cricket team of the time. It was also very globally connected. The team at the time was dominated by young men from Karachi and Lahore, educated, urbane, charismatic, glamorous, and who had lost their colonial inferiority complex and were by this time demanding equality with the traditional powers of the game, England and Australia. And then anyone who knows the political history of Pakistan knows that we have a decade of Islamization that follows. In the late 1970s and 80s, General Zia comes to power, and this brings about a very significant transformation of the cultural identity of society. Pakistan becomes more conservative. Elements of extremism, radicalism, sectarianism creeping in. The democratic governments that followed after General Zia's death were never willing, nor were they able or capable to reverse these trends. And in the decades that followed, the seeds that were laid in the 80s in Pakistan began to bear fruit in the 1990s and beyond. So we see the geographical spread of the game from the 1970s and 1980s. We begin to see the composition of the team becoming much more diverse, becoming much more reflective of what Pakistan is like at the time. As the middle class move into commerce, the role of the universities and schools begins to decline. The importance of Lahore and Karachi begins to wane. Instead, it is initially smaller centers in Punjab, Sialkot, Sahiwal, Gujranwala, Multan, Sheikhupura, from where cricketers begin to emerge. And by the 1980s, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, at that time the Northwest Frontier province, initially so opposed to cricket because of its connection with colonial impression, also begins to produce cricketers. This is a very different generation. It's a generation that learnt its cricket on dusty streets, on maidans, and who came from less privileged and much more diverse backgrounds. So that by 2004, Pakistan is being led by Inzamam ul Haq, the son of a prayer leader, and who captained a team of players from all over Pakistan and from much less privileged backgrounds. Sons of daily wage laborers, night watchmen, small farmers, cricketers from smaller centers and those whose childhoods were molded during Zia's Islamization. These changes in the composition of the Pakistan cricket team reflected the wider political changes and social changes that Pakistan was going through along the way. So we've moved from this very elite sport to a much more diverse sport, just as Pakistan is changing as well. From the 1980s onwards, in addition to local political factors impacting cricket, we have global political and economic changes opening cricket up to new influences. This is a decade when change swept through the world's political and social systems. Transformations were occurring globally. Pakistan entered a decade of democracy following a decade of military dictatorship. Unfortunately, with civilian rule came declining governance and an increase in corruption. Cricket too saw tumultuous changes. The balance of power in the global governance of cricket shifted dramatically towards South Asia, particularly to India, bringing about a very rapid commercialization of the sport in the subcontinent. One of the ways that the confluence of local and global factors manifested itself was in the form of match fixing, a vice that damaged the credibility of the game globally and in Pakistan. Match fixing highlighted the increasingly acute contradictions between cricket's moralistic ideology and the reality of its political economy in the age of late capitalism. Commercialization battered cricket's old ethos, replacing it with a new set of values. What Appadurai calls the transcendence of traditional cricketing norms and values, where making money features more prominently than the spirit of the game or its nationalist concerns. Money brought in its wake new promises of and desires for upward mobility and modernity. Inevitably, it attracted the attention of criminal networks. The heady days of greed, fame, excess of the 90s were promoted rather than discouraged by maladaptive leadership, and this brought scandal. Global influences such as commercialization facilitated the emergence of modern-day match fixing. But at a more local level, it is poor leadership and endemic corruption in Pakistan which allowed the unfettered growth and normalization of, if everyone is doing it, why not us? Pakistan is a corrupt society that is getting more corrupt. Governments come to power vying to root out corruption, only to be removed for corrupt practices. Was it really a surprise that some of Pakistan's cricketers became embroiled in this match-fixing scandal? And interestingly, this is one of the reactions that we get, again born of what is happening in Pakistan. Redemption and catharsis would come via another aspect that had gained increasing currency in Pakistan at the same time: the specter of increasing religiosity. Religiosity in cricket came about as a unique response to some of the impacts of commercialization and globalization, as a form of redemption to the emptiness of fame, commercialization, moral degeneration, lack of mentorship needed a reset and a redemption, which is what the Islamic Party, the Tablighi Jamaat, promises you. Let us remember that the Tablighi Jamaat had received enormous state support during General Zia's time and beyond, and managed to penetrate deep into Pakistan society, the civil and military bureaucracy, amongst businessmen, amongst university lecturers, amongst celebrities and spokespersons. This overt religiosity has declined, and it's declined because local stressors, the poor leadership, and the scandal itself have begun to disappear, or at least recede. But Pakistan's increasing isolation from 2009, declining governance, declining foreign relations, an increase in militancy, epitomized by the attack on the Sri Lankan cricket team, saw a parallel isolation and loss of support for cricket in Pakistan. So Pakistan as a country is becoming isolated. Pakistan as a cricket nation is becoming isolated from 2009 onwards. 10 years passed without cricket on home soil. And Pakistan's rehabilitation in the cricketing world has been a difficult process. Significant steps have been made in what has been an arduous journey back for Pakistan and Pakistan cricket. The fact is that, as the book argues, sport is part of wider culture and inevitably will be influenced by wider political, economic, and cultural environments, whether they are in Russia or whether they are in Pakistan. Let me move now briefly on to the second theme of the book. So far, we've seen the reflection of Pakistan in its cricket, the changing nature of the team. And I want to move a little bit now to cricket's influence on wider society, politics, and culture. Inevitably, the great importance attached to cricket in Pakistani society means that it would have a major role to play in the country's identity, in its international relations, and in its image. Undoubtedly, as cricket spread across the country, successive governments saw it as a means of nation building and identity construction, leading to cricket being appropriated both by civilian governments, but most of all by the military governments that came to power. We know that sport has enormous emotional appeal. And if you apply Anderson's concept of an imagined community where you build solidarity through routine activities, in this instance, playing a game with a bat and a ball, you see the potential for creating what Durkheim referred to as collective effervescence amongst large swathes of the population. Cricket could be the forum for creating a vision of a glorious and triumphant nation. It could be used, as Australia used hundreds of years ago, for example, to announce itself to the world as a successful nation. For a new country struggling to find something to act as a marker of identity, cricket as a collective cultural expression was ideal. Sport has been recognized as having a role to play in the consolidation of certain nationalisms or the promotion of the interests of particular nation states. Cricket was therefore used, particularly by authoritarian governments, to forge an identity and bestow legitimacy upon their governments. It was also used to define bilateral relations, none more so than in Pakistan's bilateral relations with neighboring India and also with England, its former colonial master. Now, the shortness of time means I will concentrate on the India-Pakistan relation as the most important. Although in the book, cricket has important influences on Pakistan's relations with England particularly, but also with Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka. Now, over the years, arguably the country that has played the most important role in Pakistan's national narrative is its neighbor, India. The relationship is complex, contradictory, and it's globally influential. Cricketing relations between India and Pakistan are crucial to understanding the wider relations between the two countries. Not only does cricket reflect the culture, national identities, and aspirations of both countries, it also impacts significantly on their political relations. If we factor in that up to 1 billion people in South Asia watch bilateral India and Pakistan matches, we realize the significance of cricket in these two neighboring countries. In fact, I read today in The Guardian that this is probably the most watched bilateral sporting event out of all sports. Moreover, the influence of cricketing icons in both countries is enormous, and that throws up all matter of potential in terms of what could be achieved by these icons. So in the 75 years of independence, there are, broadly speaking, 3 periods of connectivity between India and Pakistan, totaling about 30 years. And they're divided up by an equal number of blocks of rupture, totaling about 40 years. So what I'm going to do is just go over these ruptures and connectivity periods quickly to bring out some of the main themes that come up in this India-Pakistan and how cricket has impacted the relations. Now, for me, the most surprising period of connectivity was the earliest one, from 1952 to 1961. And it's surprising because within 5 years of partition, as I mentioned, a time when up to 20 million people are moving and up to 1 million people have lost their lives in terrible violence, India supports Pakistan's entry into the International Cricket Council and is the first country to play a test match against Pakistan. In contrast, England and Germany would not play football for 9 years after the World War. And if you take the war itself into account, it's 16 years between periods that they play one another. Furthermore, in 1952, some of the initial tension between India and Pakistan as new nations had eased, but they'd already fought a war over Kashmir in 1948, and skirmishes continued periodically along an increasingly militarized border. The relationship in 1952 then remains tense. The Pakistan cricket tour to India represented the first real opportunity for people-to-people contact following the geographical and violent rupture of partition. The two captains, Lala Amarnath and Abdul Hafiz Kardar, had a common heritage, and they would have understood each other very well. They had lived a stone's throw from one another in Lahore. Both had learnt their cricket in Lahore and had played in the fields of Minto Park. Both had played for Lahore's famous Crescent Club. They spoke the same language and they shared the same culture. But where one would have expected hostility in this initial tour, there was only amity. Waqar Hassan, one of the touring Pakistani cricketers, stated and I take this from his diary. The hospitality and the care for the visiting team was such that it seemed to us that all the enmity that existed during the partition of India and in the creation of Pakistan between the two nations had fizzled out into the air. A similar script was followed when India made a return tour to Pakistan in 1954. 10,000 Indian fans traveled to watch the Lahore Test match. Those that lived in Amritsar were allowed to cross back every night to their homes. It was remarkable that these first two tours produced such warmth between the players and the crowds. How is this possible? Now, my explanation is that there existed a cultural capital that a geographical and violent partition could not extinguish, and which continued to facilitate communication and connectivity so that even following serious ruptures, shared histories, shared legacies, shared cultures promoted reconnection and healing. And this is important because I feel that every time a reconnection is made, this is an important aspect of it. When thinking of India and Pakistan, the dominant view is of enmity. But there's also a deep bond that has existed throughout the last 7 decades. The collective histories and cultures remain at odds with the political relations between the nation states. The two countries share similar languages, music, dress, customs, cuisines. And when their citizens meet abroad, they slip easily into camaraderie. Indian films remain very much part of the culture across the border, and Pakistani television serials and musicians have been popular in India. Until fairly recently, a national of either country visiting the other was soon overwhelmed with the hospitality showered upon them by anyone discovering where they were from. Now, the least surprising of the breaks that happens between India and Pakistan was the first rupture that followed from 1961 to 1978, 17 years. 2 wars meant that this was a period when there was a much broader rupture and connectivity beyond cricket. Trade, travel, postal links were broken, diplomatic relations were downgraded. And then we have from 1978 to 1990, the longest period of interaction. And this follows General Zia's succession in 1977 and is being described as a period that was atmospherically positive, but substantively stagnant. While there was nothing of substance achieved, the two countries maintained good intentions towards one another, leading to a kind of what has been referred to as a peace theatre. The cricket tours were part of this peace theatre, boosted by the enthusiasm of the two cricket boards, the players and the fans on both sides of the border. And while it's true to say there were no substantive political breakthroughs in this decade, connectivity was higher than at any point previously. We have regular flights between the cities of Karachi, Lahore, Delhi, and Bombay, and sporting encounters, particularly in hockey and in cricket, were happening every year. Politically, throughout the 1980s, political tensions remained high, but General Zia and Rajiv Gandhi had developed a personal rapport in which cricket was often used to diffuse political tensions and maintain connectivity so that these avenues were kept open. Maybe the most significant feature of this period was the rise of cricket diplomacy, which happened in Jaipur to start with, and the burgeoning relationship between the Pakistan Cricket Board and the Indian Cricket Board, which showed a glimpse of what India-Pakistan cooperation could achieve if it was given the right circumstances. Now, beginning with the escalation of militancy in Kashmir in the early 1990s and culminating during the Kargil War in 1999, we have a semi-consensus emerging in India that India should not play with Pakistan on either Indian or Pakistani soil while people were dying due to Pakistan's allegedly subversive activities. This led to the second long break between 1990 and 2003. Another 13 years passes, save for a short Pakistan tour to India in 1998, which was remarkable in itself for the against-the-grain warmth of the Indian reception throughout the tour for Pakistani players. Unfortunately, the Kargil War put an end to that rapprochement for another 4 years. But again, the reconnection brings about immediate dividends. Following a decade of hostility and declining people-to-people contact, a political rapprochement between Vajpayee and Musharraf brought about the most enduring gains in connectivity that India and Pakistan have experienced. Between 2003 and 2008, relations improved with a glimpse of what real and enduring peace may look like. Amongst the most successful of the confidence-building measures and amongst the earliest was the announcement and the subsequent enormous success of India's tour to Pakistan in 2003-04. This spurred a raft of people-to-people contacts during the matches themselves and beyond. I think that by this time, by 2003, this connection had become urgent. A long break in people-to-people contacts, growing negative stereotypes led to Pakistan and India viewing themselves as enemies that were ill-disposed towards one another, not as arch rivals. Yet, as in 1952, the warmth of the interaction after the break and once a conducive political environment is created was astonishing. And again, I'll read a short quote from a journalist who came to Pakistan in 2003 with the tour. Bhattacharya writes, for the Indians poured in. They came in numbers that they had never been permitted to come in before. They came by air, they came by foot, they came by road, they came by rail, using all the channels that had been opened up since Vajpayee's January visit. Larger flights, special flights, extra buses, thousands came on foot with banners saying friends forever. 20,000 visas, I remember, were issued for the 2 matches in Lahore. 5,000 were issued for 1 match in Mohali. The composite dialogue process was restarted. The landmark bus service started across the ceasefire line dividing India and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. The ban on Indian films, 40 years, was removed. There was restoration of relations, increased rail links, high-level exchanges. And even the 2008 Mumbai attacks were a setback, but it didn't lead to a break in relations. Such was the enduring nature of the ties at this time. I'm going to skip forward a little bit because of the shortage of time. Where are we now? Relations spiraled downwards from 2016 after a number of skirmishes occurred in Kashmir. We've had no bilateral cricket since 2012. Air links were severed in 2017. The visa regime has made it almost impossible for people to visit each other across the border. At one point, hundreds of thousands of visas a year were being given. This has dropped to something like 200 visas at the moment, and even medical visas are not given. There's a ban on Pakistanis actors and actresses working in the Motion Picture Association. Pakistani cricketers are the only that are barred from the IPL. And while both countries block the broadcast of the respective T20 leagues, we can't see each other's leagues in each other's countries. The Pakistani government has responded with a blanket ban on all Indian television and radio programs. In 2019, Pakistan suspended the Samjhauta Express, the primary train service between Pakistan and India, as well as the Lahore-Delhi Dosti bus service. It also downgraded diplomatic relations. It stopped trade and postal services with India. I can't write a letter anymore and let it arrive in India. And the same the other way around. So as we look forward, the signs of better relations between Pakistan and India appear to be distant. But sport has enormous emotional appeal. It has the ability, I believe, to transcend boundaries, to overcome prejudice, and to break stereotypes. It is an immensely powerful image when you see Mahendra Singh Dhoni with Sarfraz Ahmed's son in his lap. When you see Virat Kohli and Babar Azam with huge mutual respect talking about their cricket. When you see Neeraj Chopra and Arshad Nadeem supporting each other, the javelinists. When you see Bisma Maroof, the Pakistani women's captain, surrounded by the Indian team, cooing over her baby daughter. But this cannot be done in an antagonistic atmosphere. But the longer the break, the more time we have to poison each other's minds the more we think of ourselves as different, whereas we are probably more similar today than we've ever been, bound together by our culture, our history, our poverty, our corruption, our youth, and our similar global aspirations. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ali. There is more in what you say than what is in the book, of course, but it gives a good idea of what is in the book to those who have not read it yet, because of course your approach is anthropological, that's your discipline, but you cover issues pertaining to sociology, to history, to political science, and of course international relations, at least regional relations, the famous cricket diplomacy. We're going to return to that, of course, and I now invite our first discussant, Professor Waseem, to present his own views in not more than 15 minutes.
You're muted, Waseem Saab.
You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, so in that case,
we can come back to Waseem Saab.
Yeah, we will come back to you, and Rajdeep will immediately.
Professor Waseem, if you can, exit and then join us back. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe you have a kind of bug, so maybe you can exit and come back. Rajdeep, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaffrelot, and thank you very much for having me, and congratulations to Dr. Ali on this on the book, and for a wonderful opening that he's given us a sense. Even though I haven't read the book, his thoughts have filled me, dare I say, with a tinge of nostalgia and wistfulness. I will speak as a journalist, and I will speak as someone who's been described at times in my own country as anti-national now, for advocating India-Pakistan people-to-people contact. And since cricket is the focus, let me just rewind to 2004 and one of the most memorable experiences I had in life. I took my son, then all of 8 or 9 years old, taking advantage of the visa scheme that Ali spoke about, to travel across the border, to meet a Pakistani friend who had been with me at Oxford, and very kindly had given us perfect seats right over the side screen to watch an India versus Pakistan game. And we were surrounded by a sea of Pakistani supporters, all waving their flags frantically. As it turned out, by the evening, India had won the match. And one of the Pakistani supporters came and gave my 8 or 9-year-old son at the time a flag that he was wearing, that he was carrying with him. My son then put the flag around his shoulders, his back, and insisted on carrying it wherever he went in Pakistan. And when we landed in India, he went through customs with the flag right around him. The customs looked at him with a slight element of amusement and amazement. But for the next 10 years, as my son was growing up, on the wall in his room was the Pakistani flag, which had been given to him by a Pakistani fan when we watched that match in Lahore. And in a sense, I wanted to tell this story because I think it reflects this peculiar schizophrenia that the two countries have towards each other, the emotional appeal that the sport in particular has, that Ali spoke about, but also the hostility that exists outside, which has left us in a situation where, forget about visas, we just do not have any real meaningful contact with each other at a people-to-people level. And in a sense, therefore, it is a real tragedy that this generation of Indian cricket fans can only see Pakistan through the political environment around them, where rivalry has turned to enmity, rather than look for the shared affection that the two countries had for each other, which very rightly put by Ali, reflects at various times, from the 1950s right down to today's India. The players themselves have a peculiar sense of affection for each other, even while the noise outside and the sense that, that the match is not just a game, but as Mike Marquez described, war minus the shooting. So you sense almost the decline in political relations, reflecting in the way the sport is now viewed in the two countries. And I sometimes, for the first time, start wondering whether it's worth all the pressure that we end up putting on the players, almost as if they are supposed to substitute for our failures in achieving an element of cordiality, dare I say affection, in ties. But what I was even more fascinated in a way, listening to Ali, was that what he talks of Pakistan, the evolution of Pakistan sport and its connections with culture and identity is almost a mirror of what happened in India. I've often said that India and Pakistan are separated at birth, and therefore, like two siblings, we are just the larger one. So 1.3 billion people, whatever Ali says, will manifest itself in even greater, to a greater degree in this country than it would in Pakistan. The 40s and 50s, for example, in India, were a period of a nascent democracy that was still struggling to come to terms with a long period of colonialism. And therefore, cricket too reflected to some extent the feudal remnants of what had happened in the pre-47 era. So you had the Indian Cricket Board play the role of almost this feudal patron, wherein those with privilege got access to the sport much more than those perhaps who were deprived membership of a gymkhana or membership of a privileged club where you could play the sport. I have this great story of in my book of where Indian cricket was in the 1950s, and I'm sure it's true of Pakistan. Indian cricketers were paid rupees 250, 250 rupees, not a very big amount you'd think today, but okay in those days. They once defeated New Zealand in 3 days, and the board decided to pay them 150, saying you are daily wage laborers effectively. Who told you to win in 3 days? If you'd won in 5, we'd paid you 250. You won in 3, we paid you 150. So it was a very feudal structure with the board right at the very top, where there were these influences that prevented, I think, meritocracy from truly emerging. You'll find in the 1950s, a number of Indian cricketers played for the country less than 5 tests, 2-3 tests. So they were chosen based on strong regional considerations or networks and connections that existed. I think the 60s and 70s sees the emergence of an urban middle class as democracy deepens in India. And therefore, the 60s and 70s sees the rise of the middle class cricketer. And mainly metropolitan. When India defeated England in 1971 for the first time, 6 of the 11 players were from Mumbai. 2 of them were from Bangalore. The others were from Chennai and Delhi. But essentially, it was a very metropolitan sport through that critical period of 60s, 70s, 80s. The urban middle class was finding its feet. Then, of course, comes the 80s, which is a fascinating degree. So if Islamization takes place in Pakistan, this is the degree, this is the decade, and Christoph, you will know well about this, of riot after riot, of communalization deepening in India politically, of a period of 1 million mutinies rising in different parts of the country. Ironically, cricket is saved in a way by the fact that we win the 1983 World Cup, and the emergence of Kapil Dev suggests that a new cricket hero, in a way, is born, who inspires an entire generation of Indian cricketers to take up the sport outside the traditional Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Madras presidency towns. The 90s is when the rise of satellite television again changes the way the sport is seen. And suddenly the sport is slowly but surely spreading well beyond, again, its familiar catchment areas. And then, of course, you have the most dramatic decade, which is the last decade, which is, in a way, India's era of becoming part of the globalized world. And the emergence of the Indian Premier League makes India the new superpower of sport, where players are auctioned for multi-crore amounts. So in a way, from the 150 rupees that the players in my father's generation who played for India in the 60s were given to where they get these multi-crore amounts, you see in the emergence of India, a certain democratization where every part of India today plays cricket as their number one sport. There was a time when Kolkata, for example, saw football as its number one sport. But today, a cricket match in Eden Gardens will probably attract a much larger crowd than Mohun Bagan versus East Bengal. We saw a few years ago a cricketer from Kashmir, Parvez Rasool, play for India. And more remarkably, in the last few months, we've seen the rise of a young fruit seller's son, Umran Malik, again from Jammu. And I think the most important factor that we are seeing in Indian cricket today, again mirroring what we've seen in Pakistan, is that the players now come from backgrounds that are far less affluent, from more rural, semi-rural, what I call India B, where really the new India is emerging, and therefore have, as my late father would say, fire in the belly. The fire in the belly in new India is essentially located outside the big metropolises. And with that has come new opportunity. I was fascinated, for example, to find out that almost every Indian district today has a turf cricket ground, including some of the more poorer parts of the country like Chhattisgarh, relatively, or Jharkhand, from where Mahendra Singh Dhoni comes from. I mean, these are among the poorer parts of the country in terms of per capita income. But even here, most districts today have one cricket ground where young people can go and practice, can train, and thereby create, I think, a completely changed cultural environment in which the sport is played in this country. And all of this, in a way, ironically mirrors exactly what was suggested by Ali there. For example, match fixing in India. It happens in Pakistan and in India around the same time. It comes at a time when liberalization increasingly leads to question marks over the way resources are distributed by our politicians, leading to charges of massive corruption. At the same time, cricket, which we thought as this pure sport away from the taint of corruption, suddenly finds even in its captain, Mohammad Azharuddin, someone who is tainted at the time by corruption. In fact, Azharuddin, I thought, was a fascinating figure in many ways because he becomes captain of the Indian team around the same time as the Babri Masjid is demolished. And I will never forget, the sort of environment that had been created at the time. Mumbai had riots in 92, 93, and Azharuddin leads a winning team to Mumbai. And there is this poster which is put up, Mohammad Azharuddin, made in India. In the times in which we had just gone through horrific riots that had taken place in Mumbai, the captain of the Indian team was a proud Indian Muslim. And I think sport in India, in that sense, cricket in particular, has had that same impact that it's had in Pakistan in breaking boundaries. You see, we've been both countries which for the longest time worked on very close cliques and networks. Through the 50s, 60s, I think in particular, it mattered who your father was. And your lineage mattered more than ever before. I think the new India and the new Pakistan, dare I say, actually can celebrate sport because it is truly one of the few areas in society in these two countries that is meritocratic, wherein increasingly you do not get selected simply because of your surname or because of your connections, but you get selected because of pure talent. And I think the great success of sport in both these two countries has been the discovery of these new talents. I remember the great Imran Khan once said, Pakistan succeeds despite the system, not because of it. And he's probably right, in the Pakistan context. In India, I think the system has changed. The system actually has become much more open and inclusive than ever before. Some things haven't changed. The secretary of the Indian Cricket Board, the most powerful Indian cricket functionary, is the son of the Home Minister. And I dare I say, I believe even in Pakistan today, many of the people who control the sport are still people who represent some of those old powerful elites or the new powerful elites, dare I say, and they're able to control the sport. So sport in a way legitimizes them. But I think what is critical to understand about both India and Pakistan, and there Ashish Nandi, I think, got it right, is that this is almost, dare I say, a subcontinental sport accidentally discovered by the British. There is something about the sport that fits in with Indian notions of time and motion. An Australian sociologist, Richard Cashman, actually reflected upon that there was something almost, in the early years, in a caste-rigid society like India, most of the batsmen were seen to be Brahmins. Many of the bowlers were seen to come from the middle peasant caste. And one of the regrets that we have in the sport over the last 75 years is that unlike in politics, we haven't thrown up enough Dalit star cricketers. There hasn't been that Dalit and tribal. We haven't thrown up the great Dalit or tribal iconic cricketer. But otherwise, at every level, we've seen far greater mobility emerging, social mobility emerging through cricket than at times we have in other arenas of life. And therefore, I think, in a way, cricket is a celebration of our diversity. You can see that in the Pakistan cricket team. When I hear about these young boys coming from villages in the Northwest Frontier Province and other parts of the country, and you can see that in India today. I therefore, would conclude by suggesting that the best way to celebrate India-Pakistan cricket in these 75 years would be actually to play a test series in England. It's a proposition that has, I believe, just been made by the ECB because they've realized that they will get a far greater crowd than you would probably even get for England versus Australia if India played Pakistan in England. And it just suggests just the impact of the diaspora of the two countries and how you could actually take India-Pakistan cricket beyond the competitive nationalisms that exist in the subcontinent, possibly to a neutral ground, and thereby give another generation a chance to experience each other's crickets. It would be a real pity if the two countries do not get a sense of just who's the better batsman, Babar Azam or Virat Kohli. I made the mistake the other day on Twitter of suggesting that Babar was now the best batsman in the world and got an avalanche of attacks from Indian nationalists or jingoists on social media, suggesting how could I commit the ultimate hearsay of suggesting that Babar today was a better batsman. I think, therefore, there is huge opportunity that sport presents to restore an element of normalcy in what's been a very, very difficult relationship. And I hope that people read Ali's book, if only to realize that across the border, the sport is just as fanatically followed as it is in this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rajdeep, for engaging with Ali's book so enthusiastically and for making the comparison with India so meaningful. You've put us also on a memory lane. After all, we met in 1993 in Bombay when you were covering the city's events for Times of India. And you raise questions, we will return to them, Ali will return to them, and you make a proposition, a kind of policy-oriented proposition that we could also try to publicize and promote. But before doing that, let's turn to Professor Vasim. Hopefully the mic is functioning, working now.
Hello?
Yes, it works. We are listening to you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll come back to India and Pakistan later. First, the author of the book. Here is an anthropologist speaking. We have to have this thing in mind. The authenticity of resources, which we know as social scientists matters, here from archives to interviews, wherever I've seen the references throughout the book, these references play out that particular aspect of this effort, which is that it's on a very sound footing in terms of scholarship. So for me as a social scientist, and I belong to political science, for me there's a lot in it by way of the familiar ground where the the archival research on the one hand and the participant observation on the other, they meet, and very successfully. And here I would say, again, as an anthropologist, Ali Khan has tried to bring out the interpersonal relations, for example, between the captain and the team members. Actually, here and there, this thing is very, very crucial, where there was this religious-oriented captain under whom the whole wave of religiosity spread out. And on the other hand, there is Imran Khan, who is again accredited with power and discipline and vision, as I see in the book. And of course, long before that, Abdul Hafiz Kardar, the way he managed the team. So that aspect is very exciting for me, because that brings out the very function of the team out on the ground and its logistics. And again, here, I feel there is quite a bit of objectivity in the sense that Ali Khan is neither too close nor too distant from those who are there very much playing their role, either in the Pakistan Management Board or the cricketers whom he interviewed, and of course, sometimes multiple times, and his peek into the working of various departments, particularly Pakistan Cricket Board, but also others. So here is what I see an anthropologist at work. After that, I would say the identity construction Ali Khan has been talking about. I thought and I hoped that he would forget parts of the book which he has written, but obviously he had all this in his mind. Here I see it as a bondage between players out on the ground and their supporters who are not on the ground. They are everywhere else in the world, particularly in the nation at large. And what is at work here? And this is very interesting. It's the image and the function of taking sides, just like in a war. So here is a war by peaceful means. That's how I looked at it. Here, taking sides is very important, particularly in the process of identity construction. And the process is dotted by frenzied excitement. You see fours and sixes. These are the moments where excitement goes and then comes back. So that's a very live and dynamic process in a way, this particular sport, cricket, because for example, in football, there is a kind of a steady flow of excitement. The ebb and fall which you see in cricket, that's peculiar in a way and unique. And here, overall, I would say that this book has given cricket a larger than life profile, because the way he has been talking about politics, about history, about international relations, particularly the relations with Pakistan and the world cricket, and of course, India and Pakistan. This is fascinating because this way, cricket is no more cricket. Cricket is a kind of a spectrum through which you look at the society as well as the state. Second, there is a kind of a vertical process, a longitudinal journey which he has sketched out, and I would say very successfully. For example, he's very much into the liberal times. He has actually made a kind of a context here where there is the past and there is the present. And there are two clear modes of action and thought. For example, in the past, the way he lays it out, particularly with reference to 50s and 60s, the so-called liberal times in Pakistan's history. And there he uses the words like glamour, urbanity, cosmopolitanism, and of course, there is this process of intermingling with other teams. This meeting with the other teams, that was normal at that time, and it is a kind of belabored now. It's amazing the way in the process, the nation and the cricketers got introverted. This is fantastic that Pakistanis moved from one particular state of mind to another due to, of course, various political crises and social and intellectual changes. So there is a kind of a visual contact, the way I saw in the book, that is established between the team members and millions of viewers out there. So from those liberal times, we move to the conservative times. It started, for example, 2 decades ago, by the turn of the century. And here, of course, he has written and he has talked about the religiosity. Why is it that suddenly we have started feeling in our history that there was this particular phase where, if not through any other means, through rituals, through a kind of a public behavior pattern, there was that particular aspect of social and political life which came out on the ground and in the teamwork. So this religiosity was very much combined with getting into oneself, getting back, that is introversion, that is keeping the distance from the others, other nationals particularly, and in this case, of course, India has been discussed. But in his view, there is that particular deficit of professionalism and finesse, which is glaring, which is very important, because that loss of cosmopolitan behavior is somehow linked to the journey from economic, political, social, cultural liberalism to conservatism, that is in the larger society. So here I see the book as a social history of cricket across generations, at least 3 generations he has covered, and across classes, because here the sport moved from aristocracy to the big city middle class men, and of course now to the people from small towns and the lower middle class. It's a clear vision. In fact, I see the book in terms of a very elegant text and a very appealing style, because that makes it very readable. Now coming to the last point, because I know time is running, the most charming and most relevant aspect of the book, about which both the speakers have talked about that's India and Pakistan. The cricket binary, the most famous cricket binary which has ever happened, for example, in the history of cricket. Now, here, first of all, there are these nodal points of excitement in the game I mentioned. And that, in a way, has muffled hostility, the larger hostility, the grander hostility within the box, which is the screen of the TV. The people are now hooked to the media, the electronic media, and their voices go up and down from a distance that plays a kind of a cathartic function, and which is in a way nice. The two hostile nations are, if not talking to each other, they're playing with each other still, and that movement of emotions is then carried out, let's say, not only between the two countries, but in the world at large, which in a way tends to routinize the sentiments, the high and low in the two countries. So I see the movement from camaraderie between the two countries and the two teams 50 years ago to the present day soft, much softer exchange between the two persons, for example, like Babar and Kohli, as it has been talked about. They're talking to each other, and that is what matters. In other words, let's not talk about hostility in cricket. Of course, there has been the international atmosphere the way it is between the two countries, but cricket still has that particular game factor about it. They really try to win, both the teams, and that's the most beautiful thing, because they take the play very seriously. And here I would say one thing, the last thing I should say, this process of cricket binary, this what the author says, sibling rivalry, that has meant one thing, which is that the non-cricketers have snatched the initiative from the two cricketing nations. Now you go to Dubai, now you go to Sharjah, to the Gulf, and here what happens is that there's an ironic situation, very ironical, which is that you are playing with back-to-back rather than face-to-face game. Of course, you are playing on the ground, but the emotions are so high, and the hostility is, in a way, a defining variable that would one day give place to more positive sentiments, both on the ground and off the ground. Overall, I see this book probably a modern classic in terms of Pakistan's literature on sports. Here is what Ali Khan has done beautifully, bringing the two perspectives together. Here is sport, and here is national, social, cultural, political, and other factors put together, the way they meet out on the playground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Basim, for this very meticulous reading of Ali's book. And yes, indeed, it's already a classic in the making. We have 20 minutes left, so I will skip my remarks. I'll make them by the end if there is enough time, but there are many questions in the Q&A box. And Ali, you may also want to react to what has been said so far. It's up to you. Either we take more questions, or you respond or react to what has been said till now.
I think let's take questions, and I can maybe bring in stuff that the discussants talked about.
Great. So Vignesh, why don't we invite some of our colleagues who have asked questions to speak on the screen and ask the question themselves? If we invite Asma and if we invite Leila, at least we will make this panel less masculine in the first place, which is completely politically incorrect. Why don't we do that? Asma may ask her two questions directly by being invited to speak and join the panel on the screen, if this is fine with her. And with you, Vignesh, because you are the master of everybody, the deus ex machina there.
I just asked Dr. Faiz. Yes, she's now going to join us as, yes, she's here.
Great. Asma, why don't you ask your questions directly to Ali and show your face if you can?
Yes, so I was looking at my, which I can't seem to find now, Vignesh.
No, I can. So it's here. It's called.
I'm interested because, you know, whenever I study something, Christoph, as you know, I'm always thinking about civil-military relations in Pakistan. So the question that I was trying to ask Ali, and also I forgot to compliment Ali because it's a great book. I was able to read it. I just wanted to say that because you have talked about, the management of cricket in Pakistan, the nitty-gritty details of, how Pakistan Cricket Board is run. So like in your, this whole trajectory, have, change in governance, regime change, have they had an impact? The whole, notion of military's essentially efficiency. Would you see that as far as, the management of Pakistan Cricket Board is concerned? Secondly, also that cricket diplomacy, which seemed to work fine when Rajiv Gandhi and Ziaul Haq were at the helm of the affairs. And this wasn't like, the happiest time between India and Pakistan. You had almost nuclearization taking place. So, but if cricket diplomacy could work back then, why doesn't it seem to work post Mumbai for us? Is there a chance? And also what everybody wishes to do, which is that we're sick of seeing only India, Pakistan playing in Abu Dhabi or Sharjah or Dubai. So do you foresee India visiting Pakistan or vice versa? Thank you, Christoph.
You're most welcome. And we may take one more question, and then we need to let Ali respond to
Yes. So
all these remarks and questions. Yeah.
yeah, these are by anonymous participants. One says, Ali, please talk, if you will, about your father's contribution to cricket in Pakistan. I believe he has been an enormous influence on the game in Pakistan. And the other is rather long. Excellent talk, Professor Ali. It was heartwarming, insightful. I have two questions. First, extending the argument, how would Bangladesh feature in this discourse for Pakistan as well as for India? Second, following up on the previous question, there are parallels between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and post-Soviet world or North-South Korea, both territories with shared history. However, there is no similar diplomatic route available, as no sport has the same shared passion. So if you had to comment in one sentence, what makes South Asia region so different and so passionate about this sport, cricket, that can have overwhelming power to bridge political strife?
Thank you. And the first question Vignesh asked takes us back to what Rajdeep was saying about cricket boards, what we can call cricket politics. And as he said, we have now at the end of the Indian version of it, the son of the Home Minister of the Modi government. And Rajdeep asked or suggested that maybe on the Pakistani side, this kind of cricket politics was not so pervasive. Can you tell us more about that? And also, what does it mean for a political family to get this kind of prestigious position on both sides of the border?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I'll try and keep the answers brief. Generally speaking, actually, what I found was that the military tended to appoint better administrators. And I think part of that was motivated by their desire to gain legitimacy. So they needed cricket to be run well. And they used it more than the democratic governments tended to use it in order to influence relations with India, for example. So generally, you found that military governments would appoint administrators and were much more hands-on in ensuring that cricket was used as a means of nation building, as a means of cricket diplomacy, as with Rajiv Gandhi and General Zia. In opposition to that, if you think of the democratic governments, unfortunately, what happened with democratic governments is they tended to use this position, which is a very high-profile position, to dole out patronage. So, you would give this to people who didn't have any real understanding of cricket nor of administration. And it had an enormous impact on the game itself. I mean, I think the 2009 disaster that happened was partially due to who was in charge of the cricket board at the time and who was a political appointment during that government. So I think that's what happened between military and sort of democratic governments. I don't think that politics comes into the cricketing game as much as it does in India. I think in Pakistan, it's just a matter of trying to ensure that this one thing that has brought us kudos and image is not destroyed. So, I think it's been somewhat insulated from that. I think in India, there's much more a usage of the political rhetoric and the overarching kind of what is in place right now in India, seeping into what is a very major popular culture. I think there's less of that in Pakistan, and I think you see it to some extent. Does it have an impact on the game? It does. I think that when you have changes at the top, what tends to happen is you have a lot of turbulence below, and it means that you have, captains will change more often if your governments are changing, and that means that Pakistan has lacked stability in the cricket team even, and where they've had stability, we've tended to do much better. But it's been very chaotic on occasion, so I think it has an impact there. There was a question of diplomacy and why is that not working right now? I think that during Zia and Rajiv Gandhi's time, there was that brass tacks, the army movement, and that was really. I see political scientists talking about how the tension declined, but they often forget that moment when Zia went to Jaipur to see the match, and it was after that we had this decline in tension. So I think that at that time, let's remember that the avenues for communication were open. There were a lot of people traveling between the two countries. Yes, we were still politically hostile, but avenues for talking were open. And that's very different from where we are now. I don't think those avenues are open. Asma did bring up, well, post-Mumbai, could it work? Well, post-Mumbai, as I said, it did work because Gilani went to Mohali and met with Manmohan Singh. After that, in 2012, we continued to play. It's after 2016 that this has fallen apart because things have just become so poisoned on both sides. And until you have some kind of political will, I think it's what Rajdeep Saab said, we reach a point where we expect too much from cricket then. Cricket cannot replace the relations between the two countries. It can help, but then the onus on Babar Azam and Virat Kohli to bring about peace between the two countries is clearly asking too much. So, where will we play in each other's countries? It seems very unlikely at this time. I think if there was will, we would certainly be able to do it. The next best thing is as was mentioned, this very recent proposal that we play in England. And I think we have to start somewhere and we have to move from that. I would have even thought about maybe allowing the two teams that represent Punjab in their T20 tournaments to play, but I think small steps could be taken before we move to something larger. So, there's always some hope, I think, there. My father's contribution, he was the chairman of the cricket board. I think importantly, what he did bring was he was also a career diplomat. And I think that did help in the times when India and Pakistan, particularly those bilateral relations were important. I also have another connection. Of course, I was my uncle was Mansoor Ali Khan Patodi. So we have those linkages that go a long way back, and of course that helps as well. There was a question about Bangladesh, and I think that's again both Bangladesh and Afghanistan are very interesting in terms of their relations with Pakistan. If you look at it in a cricketing way. Bangladesh, particularly under the recent Awami League, is very pro-India. And as a result, the cricketing relations also tend to be mediated in that way. They haven't been able to support Pakistan as much as we would have liked, particularly in this period of isolation. I think Pakistan was hoping that Bangladesh would be one of the countries that would say that we will come back and play in Pakistan, and that didn't happen until very recently, and a lot of it is because of the government's alignment towards India. And of course, let's remember that Pakistan and Bangladesh relations have been probably at their lowest point about 3 to 4 years ago. There's hardly been any contact between the two countries. And that's only begun to change recently. I think because Bangladesh has had some skirmishes with India over internal affairs, which has, allowed Pakistan to say, well, look towards us now. So that meant that the Bangladesh team did come. And of course, Afghanistan is another one where you are mediated by the India-Pakistan relationship. So Pakistan supported Afghanistan cricket enormously in its very early phases. Many of the cricketers in Afghanistan learned their cricket in Peshawar, in the refugee camps, and the PCB also supported them hugely. And later on, then India became very influential in their progress. But of course, this tension between India and Pakistan means that it plays out in Afghanistan also. So, Afghanistan cricketers are loath to sort of now accept that Pakistan was important in their progress. They've been asked to ensure that, you must point out India's substantial contribution. And, again, it reflects our relations where India and Pakistan play out this rivalry on Afghan soil. It's unfortunate because both countries have actually contributed hugely to what is now a very, very exciting new cricketing team. There was a question about, I think, North-South Korea and shared passions. I think, again, I'll go back to what Rajdeep Saab said about cricket in India, pre-partition India. Not everything diffuses from one culture to another, but for reasons that we are not entirely sure of, whether it was the caste system, whether it was the hierarchical society that was present in the subcontinent, it struck a chord with us. And we took to this game in a way that, the passion is rivaled only by Brazil and football. And so we took to this game and we have this shared passion for it. And that gives us yet another thing that we share between these two countries, along with our other culture and our cuisine and our music and the way that we behave with our elders and the rest of it. But, there's this shared passion for the game. Why it actually worked, where it didn't work in America, is something that one should look at more carefully, but it did, and that's given us this wonderful passion, shared passion.
Yeah, and that was a good way to beat the British people at their own game, like in Lagan. Lagan is a good example of this.
Yes.
We have 5 minutes left, and I think if there is no other pressing question, I may ask mine, Vignesh.
There are two, Professor, but
okay, sorry. So please go ahead.
I'm not sure if they're pressing. One is by Sadia Zulfikar. Dr. Ali, it all sounds really interesting. I'm thinking about the politics of emotions in our understanding and relationship with cricket. Western ways of thinking discourage emotions as they can be exploited by external factors, and somehow reason can't be, which is, of course, debatable. However, the affect theory tells us that our world is shaped by emotions and feelings, and we can't discard them. So the question to you is, do you think we can talk about politics of cricket with the conscious awareness about emotions, but emotions as a way of knowing and not something only dramatic and sentimental? We might be able to engage with it more profoundly. The other question...
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Doctor. The other question by Souvik Naha. Indian test cricketers in the 1950s rarely talked about nation and nationalism in the politically informed and assertive manner in which Kardar or Mahmood acted as ideologues of Pakistani nation. Do you see any historical process at work here that led to differing forms of political consciousness among cricketers in the two countries?
Yeah, okay. So quickly, I know we're short of time, but I think the first thing about emotions, so emotions are extremely, extremely important, I think. And I'll go back to what Rajdeep Saab said. He started this conversation by saying that story about him coming across to Pakistan and how it had an enormous impact. And when we were talking before the start of this session, we were talking about the impact that the Chennai game had on people. So, these things get I think, burnt into our memory. So I think, certainly emotions are extremely important. And I'll point out that the British in Victorian times stated that, Indians could not play cricket well because they were excitable Asiatics. And this is a game that required you to be, precision oriented and without emotion. And I think we've shown that that's not the case. Suvik's question is interesting. And I think that the answer really lies in the individual here. He mentions Kardar. Now, Kardar was he was Oxford educated. He was very politically aware. He was a close confidant of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So I think in his case, the political consciousness comes from the individual. Had it been someone else, that consciousness may well not have been evident in Pakistan. But Kardar represented the cricket board and really had a very, he was very influential in preventing the return of South Africa because of apartheid. He was very influential in pushing for the inclusion of Sri Lanka, something that the Sri Lankans don't forget. So I think in that case, it was the individual's influence that had such a big role to play.
Thank you very much, Ali. If I may ask two questions before we close, one rather big and one rather small. The big one has to do with what you said in the beginning of your presentation about the way cricket promoted national unity across classes, across social milieux. Did it play the same role across regions? We know that in Pakistan, tensions between regions, the resentment vis-a-vis the Punjabi hegemony, quote unquote, played a particularly important role. As the cricket team being seen as a national team across these kind of cleavages, lines of cleavages. And my small question has to do with cricket diplomacy again. Could we say that the last achievement, the most recent, I hope not the last, the latest achievement of cricket diplomacy was seen when Sidhu took part in the swearing-in ceremony of Imran Khan, and this is the time when the Kartarpur corridor is decided. Incidentally, the Kartarpur corridor is probably the only way to cross the border today without asking for a visa. Is it the last sequence of this thing we call cricket diplomacy?
I mean, I think I'll take the last question first and say I hope not. I hope that there are avenues to explore the great emotional appeal of cricket to reignite the shared histories and cultures of the two countries. And I think we have to hope that will happen because, otherwise it's a very bleak kind of outlook. So I really hope that cricket can continue to, and it does. It has, I think just those images that we see of our cricketers from the different nations together has an impact. I think as audiences, we have that impact. I hope that we will see Pakistanis playing in the IPL, and even that will have an impact, I think. I think there's a lot that can be done there. The first question is a really interesting one. And I think that, for a very long time, right up until the late 70s, it was Lahore versus Karachi. And as soon as you dropped one person who was from Lahore, the Lahore group got up and said that this is wrong. And you even had situations where Lahori cricketers were booed in Karachi and vice versa. So those tensions were very much were present there. And I think there are people who still bring that up, but it has far less currency now than it did in the past. First of all, I think you hardly have anyone from Karachi at the moment. The impact of the smaller places are much larger now. It's much more diverse. It's much more, it is seen as a national team. And more so, we have now for the first time players from Larkana, right? We have a player from North Waziristan. Actually, what I've been hearing today is that there's a hold of KP on cricket now, of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, because the team is so dominated by Pashtuns at the moment. And there will always be people who want to use that negatively. But I think it is very much seen now as a national team. You're also beginning to get people coming from Balochistan. And I think that is one of the shining things about Pakistani cricket. You are spreading it, and there is more meritocracy to this than there has been in many other things, I think. So, I think that's a positive.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you all. That was a fascinating, very exciting conversation that, as I hope, convinced everybody that Ali's book is a must-read, and a short book, by the way, in contrast to Professor Wasim's monumental opus magnum. So
Sorry about that.
That's one more quality. But thank you so much. I will just close by telling you that we will continue with Pakistan in the next book launch that we are organizing at the King's India Institute. I have put the link in the chat, the link to this book, Insecure Guardians, Enforcement, Encounters, and Everyday Policing in Post-Colonial Karachi. The book launch will be not on Zoom, but at King's College itself on the 3rd of October at 5 p.m. So those who will be in London are most welcome to come and to meet the author, Zoa Wasim, who did a PhD at King's itself. So Pakistan is still on the list, on the agenda of the King's India Institute, as you can see. Thank you all. Thank you. And I see that the sun is setting in Delhi, Rajdeep. So I wish you a good evening. You're muted.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Among the things we share is the time zone.
Okay.
And the weather.
Yes, certainly. Have a good evening, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And see you soon.
Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.